Madelyn and Andrew, thanks for joining us on the ReBUild and Chill pod. As you guys know, it's Malibu's #1 pod. Is it still a field of one, or the other day I actually got a message from somebody saying, hey, when is the next episode of Malibu's #1 pod dropping? I listen to it from 2 hours of launch every day. So even I don't do that.
So now the pressure's on.
So the pressure's on. But we'll do a quick round of introductions. Madelyn, we'll start with you. You've got an illustrious background, and no better person to talk about the big topic of sewer than yourself. I know your background, but I don't want to butcher it. So please,
Well,
go ahead.
thank you. Thanks for not butchering it. So I think that I know more about sewers than I ever intended to know. I was on the Malibu Township Council early on. I came to Malibu because I love the ocean, I love the mountains, and I wanted to be in a community. And so I thought I would join the Malibu Township Council because it was the only game in town in the 1970s. There was no city and no local advocates. So I became the land use advocate for the Malibu Township Council. And as part of that, in the 1980s, I led the opposition against the sewer.
You led the opposition against
I
the
led
sewer.
the opposition against the sewer. I really felt we'd already had the big rock slide, which was totally traumatic for everybody.
Yeah.
And I became aware of how many slide areas there are. It's particularly along this eastern end of the coast. And the sewer that was being proposed was that one that would take from Topanga all the way up to Corral Canyon and encompass all of it wasn't city, it was county at the time. So it went quite a bit way up into the mountains too. And then
Before we dive into the specifics of the sewer itself, share a little bit about your background. I know you were the director at UCLA's Institute of Environmental Science. You spent time at the Coastal Commission. You were chairperson of the Regional Water Board. And most recently, you're part of the city's sewer ad hoc committee.
Yeah, I just can't stay away.
You didn't butcher that at all. That was great.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't chairperson. I was chairperson at the end. So anyway, I know more about sewers than anybody should know. Every time there was a chance for anyone to talk about the problems of septic systems and how we needed sewers, they would find me. I don't really know why, but I would be involved in that.
So, you mentioned Coastal Commission too?
Yeah.
What were you doing there?
I was on the Coastal Commission, and at the time, the sewer system came before the commission, and I voted it down.
In the 80s?
In the 80s, yeah.
So, and then on top of all, you've been a Malibu resident for
50 years.
50 years. Mm-hmm. So no better person,
I'm a
like I
walking
said.
history book.
So you're walking history. So no better person to talk about water, to talk about sewer than yourself. So great
There's
to have
one
you on
more
the pod.
thing that you
Yeah.
should know. My house went down in Las Flores in the 93 fire. So I have been where all of the people in this fire have been. I had to I made other decisions. I decided not to rebuild. I decided to move to a place that I thought was safer, which ended up being impacted by the Woolsey fire in the 2018.
Yeah.
So at this point, I don't think there's too many places that are safe from fire.
I don't know, just curious, did somebody else rebuild on that lot in Las
Yes.
Flores? Okay.
They used our plans. We actually got permits, and we sold the house with permits.
How long did it take you to get permits in 93?
About a year. That was, that was before.
That was the beginning of cityhood, or a couple
Well,
years in,
a few years afterwards. But the reason it didn't take us long is we had just finished remodeling. Like the plans had just been completed. We moved in a week before the fire. So I guess that was.
You consider a year not taking long?
To me, the way things go here, if you heard that I had a 900 square foot remodel on my house in Point Dume that took 2.5 years, and the septic system took another 2 years,
You'll take a year.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, let's turn to you. Everybody knows Andrew Sheldon, Sheldon Engineering. Andrew and I are working on a couple projects together. It's a difficult one, the one that we were working on together. Too many cooks in the kitchen on that one. but we're still making headway. But Andrew, go ahead and just introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. Andrew Sheldon, native of the area, born in Topanga Canyon, early 1960s. I grew up here, grew up in the mountains and on the beaches. Surfer boy, flipped hamburgers at the old Thai restaurant at Topanga Beach as a teenager, and surfed my brains out as a kid. Environmental studies undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, got a public health degree from UCLA, and then a second graduate degree from Colorado School of Mines in environmental engineering, and worked early on in my career in the haz waste and brownfields cleanup area, and then moved to the city of Malibu in 2005 and worked at the city of Malibu for 15 years in wastewater management, stormwater management, and building safety. I retired during COVID from the city and have been continuing in consulting engineering, which I started out in for the last 5 years. And this fire has just, brought me to my knees in terms of how I feel about the beach and the community and the setting that I grew up in, walking along these beaches. It's just, most of it's gone, and it makes me very sad. As I said, I started here. My mother used to take us to Malibu Lagoon. She called it the slough, and we'd swim in the lagoon because it was mild.
Yeah. It was warm and
Came
relatively
from
clean.
Virginia, yeah. They call them sloughs back there. And I have it in me, and I raised my kids here on the beaches. And it's interesting because I became the septic system reviewer for the city and, plan checked hundreds, if not thousands of beachfront septic systems over the years. And all the while, I had no qualms bringing my kids to the beach, swimming in front of houses and surfing, body surfing. And
Yeah.
So Andre,
It's-
were you the EH administrator?
I was. I started there, then I became the building department manager. And then I was acting director of the department for some time before Yolanda Bundy arrived in town.
And
I didn't know that.
you are a doctor, right? PhD.
Yes, I hold a
Colorado
doctorate
School of
in
Mines.
environmental engineering from a thing called Dog Mines.
Sheldon, right?
Yeah.
Key. All right, well, guys, let's just introduce ourselves really quickly again for the audience.
Yeah, I'm Danny Smith. We moved to Malibu 5 years ago. We bought our house on La Costa Beach in January 2023, and it burned down in January 2025. And I became involved in the ReBUild task force, and I'm currently the zone captain for La Costa Beach, La Costa Mesa, and Carbon Beach.
And I'm Darren Graves. My grandmother bought property on Big Rock Beach in '73, lived there for 40 some odd years, and passed away in 2013, at which point my family inherited her property, and that property burned down in January of last year. Studied architecture, and as of yesterday, passed my third registration exam.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
So hopefully by the end of the summer, I pass the other three, and then the
Elastic
seventh CSE, right? So designing the ReBUild, we're halfway through it. Actually, with Dr. Sheldon's help, he's on the team as a civil engineer. So looking forward to bringing architecture back down to the beach.
I'm Abe Roy. I always get berated by my colleagues here when I introduce myself, so I'm going to try to do a better job. I'm a builder, developer by trade, hopefully not the type the Malibuites hate. I lost a home in the fires. My main home fortunately survived. And since then I've been very actively engaged in trying to get our ReBUild processes streamlined to accelerate. I was the ReBUild ambassador for a period of time, which came to an unceremonious ending, which in hindsight actually kind of worked out well for us in a way, but we still have a long way to go. I also act as the chair of our ReBUild task force.
The Malibu ReBUild.
The Malibu ReBUild task force, that's right. Was that better, guys?
No, we'll bring down as MRT.
I always practice that. Yes, the MRTF, yeah.
And my name is Luis Tenner. I am a local licensed architect, and I'm originally from Spain. My passion for surfing and technology brought me to California. And then when I stepped a foot in Malibu, I fell in love with it 13 years ago and found a way to start my business here. And I started doing projects 9 years ago, specifically Malibu. I am not only passionate about Malibu and the people in Malibu, also processes. And I'm very curious. And I've been assisting city council meetings and planning commissions nonstop for 6 years. So I have, as an observer, and after the last fire, I've tried to act a bit more and try to offer my thoughts. And that's when Abe and I met, and I've been helping the MRPF for over a year right now, and super excited to chat about sewers and architecture, Malibu, and some surfing.
So no, you're like a new generation of builders and architects for Malibu. And he's the old generation, you know. But there was a group of people that came here in the early 60s that really shaped Malibu architecture on the beach.
Ed Niles.
Ed Niles, Ron Goldman, a few other people as well.
Doc Barsicchini.
Mark Barsicchini. Those are the three I knew, and they really put a stamp on the community. Well,
Tom Torres, Dr. Drucker, Harry Gensner.
yes.
Well, it's even John Launer was building.
So I've always thought it was really important to have an active architectural community. So I'm thrilled that you're about to become one, and you guys are having that going. So
That's great.
positive outcome from a
And
disaster.
he's going for the license too. That some people just don't go for it and just are designers. Darren is going for it, which I always appreciate.
For him.
Yeah, and something you may not know is that I was working for the city when the whole Civic Center sewer thing
Oh, I was
blew up, and Madelyn was on
the regional
the
board.
regional
Yeah,
board.
we'll
and
dive into that.
It was fun times, but we, solved a lot of problems and worked together through many things.
State
What's
steward.
most important about this is that it's something that the city achieved that I didn't think they were willing to achieve. I didn't think they were capable of achieving, and I was awed by it. And so, I had some hope that as you went through this whole rebuild process, you would get some of that capability.
Yeah. So for the audience that aren't perhaps tracking as well as we are in this room, what we are talking about is a sewer line. In fact, I was in Altadena last week, and Supervisor Catherine Barger showed up, and she asked me, so is Malibu finally getting a sewer line? And I paused for a second, and I said, yes, I think so, yes, yeah, maybe, whatever. And so I thought it'll be a timely conversation to get exactly at that question. Is Malibu getting a sewer line, particularly for Eastern Malibu? And I'll sort of set the table with the presentation that the city folks made at council last week. What's being discussed actively is a sewer line that's going to run from actually right here from Carbon Beach all the way down, connecting to Coastline and PCH, intersecting with the Hyperion line.
And only about a quarter of Carbon Beach, just to the final,
Wherever Carbon
Start.
Terrace is defined, right?
the final house that burned is the beginning of it. So there's a whole swath of Carbon Beach that won't
Get it. Okay. And the idea is to have every home participate in the sewer line, whether or not they have an intact on-site wastewater treatment system, right? So, Madelyn, in your comments to council, you started out saying that if a couple years back somebody told you that we were going to have this discussion, you would not have believed them.
No.
So-
It was really the homeowners in the front and the architects that started it. It's the only way it could have been done.
So say more, and especially with your background of being anti at some point back in the 80s, what changed your mind?
So that's a good place to start. I was anti because I didn't believe it was safe to put a line up and down this highway because of all the landslides. And I knew everybody was afraid, especially under the regulatory auspices of LA County, who never saw anything that they didn't want to see built on, that we would have uncontrolled growth because we had no sense of having any local control at all.
Yeah, the boogeyman in the room.
Right.
Developers
So-
ruining the neighborhood.
Yeah, I was more convinced, though, that they would not build a safe sewer. that they were not thinking of it. And at the same time, sewers are so different now than they were back in the 80s. They used to be a pipe with minimal treatment. It would shoot right into the ocean. Well, the Civic Center treatment plant doesn't send a drop to the ocean. It's all done with.
It's all reclaimed
It's
in
all
some fashion.
So
Yeah.
two issues that have been discussed is to control the density, and some believe that if you lay a sewer line, then we'll see hotels go up on the PCH, etc. That is something that's holding back development. That's one thought, and the other is ongoing land movement, which can cause problems with pipe breakage and this and that, and we might end up with a big spill.
So to me, we're already doing development on septic systems that's too big for sewer systems. In fact, septic systems were never meant to take a no-boot. It has
Or-
such huge volumes.
The Carbon Beach Inn.
Yeah, the
Or the Malibu Beach Inn or
on septic.
Dukes on septic. They're just not meant to be used that way. And I don't think that the city has the mentality where they said, oh, we need to get these on sewers because they're not safe the way they are. They're more worried about how this might draw more development. Having looked at cities all over California on this issue, people don't build because there's a sewer. They build because there's a demand. And they're built because it's the way that the land use is managed as well. So if the city is clear on the scale of development they want, and they implement that through their zoning, people don't trust that they'll keep the zoning, but it's the people that has to figure that out. And,
It's the specific plan, right? They have a specific plan, every city, county does, and they just have to use that with an iron fist.
Right.
And what I told the council last year was actually the sewer system can also be a stoppage to overdevelopment. You look at places like Marin County or any other coastal country area, RSVD up there has been around for over 110 years, and they don't overdevelop there partly because RSVD makes it impossible to get a sewer line meter.
What is
or
RSVD?
permit. Ross Valley Sanitary District.
Okay.
So it's the sewer
That's
system.
for the listeners, not for me.
So in fact, the sewer line becomes an additional control.
It becomes a hurdle for developers. Yeah, you say you can't plug into our
can't-
sewer
you
line
can't just drop-
unless you make it bigger on your dime, meaning
Yeah.
cost prohibitive.
Well, it's the infrastructure generally, is like that. So you have water
Right.
service and
Right.
you have sewer service, and those tend to.
So you're going to put a line
Restrict.
in for the entire area. It's not going to be somebody taking a line off this way or a line off that way. But what's being proposed here is to put the entire ceiling line on. And then what I said in my letter that I just sent today to the council, because I didn't finish my testimony last week, is that you have to have every site in the system. They don't have to all hook up, but they have to be part of the assessment district. Otherwise, you can't have a few homeowners
Not participating.
not participating. Then the incentive says, well, why should I? I'll just let them pay for it, and then I'll join afterwards when I'm ready.
Yeah.
So it has to be set up so that everyone is in the assessment district, and they
Was
all.
that, just spending a minute on it, was that what was proposed? I didn't pick that up from the presentation.
I didn't either.
Out on-
That's
yeah,
why I
well,
felt
it's
like I
unclear.
needed to
They
say.
say that so that we have two different numbers. There's 330 homes that burn on the beach, but this assessment is for 450.
That's
Or 461 or
That's
something.
all the,
So what is that delta of 120 households?
That's
Are those
either-
empty pieces of
Either
land?
the houses that didn't burn, or the vacant land. There's a lot of vacant land.
there's a lot of vacant land.
I would
And
like to
also-
discuss about vacant land.
Yeah, and I think there was some multifamilies in there,
well?
condominiums, where each household was counted as a separate.
And are we talking north and south side of PCH?
No.
From the discussion, it was only south.
Well, because council directed them to do only south
Only
last go round.
But Bruce was asking about including north. It would make sense for the Laco.
So as it is proposed, it's going to be, we're going to auger sort of a line through 6 feet deep, 6 feet below grade approximately, right? And then auger it through, and there's going to be these blocks at every interval, and every house on the south side of PCH from the starting point to the ending point
As a waistline that
very-
you're tatted in.
very small diameter from what I saw from
That's why they're designing it so that it would not be, somebody couldn't say Las Flores wants to come in now, or Big Rock decided But they don't want to take the chance with that landslide. They want to come in now. And it's set up so that
So
that
let's
can
kind of,
happen.
so let's
Can,
kind of.
can I ask
Go
about
ahead.
that? Was this discussed, were you on the ad hoc committee? Okay, so this was, well, it's interesting to me because that little detail wasn't brought up in the open forum of a council meeting.
Well, that, according to the staff, they said to the committee several times that this council gave us direction. And I'd rather have you hear this from them as well. But the direction was, let's take care of the beachfront because those are the people with the financial issues in front of them, the huge seawall costs and things. Let's take care of that. And everyone else can stay on septic systems. So I think that was their mode was to make this as small and limited as possible.
I
So it
think
doesn't
that's
get
fair.
abused later.
I guess that was the implicit direction, even though it was never, I don't believe, in all the meetings I attended, stated out loud, but they didn't want, it was clear a couple council members at least didn't want the sewer line to become potential for expanded development, especially in Carver Beach. So by restricting the diameter of the pipe, is that what we're saying? There can't be additional hookups in the future, 20 years from now?
It's a flow calculation.
Well, it would be it would be an area of the assessment district, and they would have to extend the assessment district and pull some other people in.
Yeah.
But the question is, though, whether or not people now want to limit that trunk line to a certain size so that nobody else can get in.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point there because when I first heard of this, I thought, how are the regional agencies, the regional planning agencies, going to like this? To think that this is going to be done one time, and it's not going to connect everyone else.
You know
We're going to
what?
disrupt.
You know what? They'll be thrilled that there's going to be any sewer in Malibu.
Right.
The fact that I wasn't in the room when they took this to the regional board staff, but their mouths dropped open because we had such a huge fight over the Malibu Civic Center, litigation up to everywhere, and this is coming. I think it's coming somewhat from the property owners, which is the most healthy thing I can imagine. I don't think the city council would have ever done this without.
So there's a lot of important things we talked about, and I just want to take them one at a time. Let's talk about the capacity issue, right? So what we are saying right now is the direction is to create capacity in terms of the diameter of the actual pipe that's going to carry the effluent to what's existing, and ensure that it cannot carry any more load in the future than the houses that's there.
Well, the
Is
vacant
that-
lands too.
And the vacant lands too.
The
There would be
vacant
some
lands and the
allocation.
multi-family homes that are there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it would basically ensure that whatever structures were there before fire, like we take a snapshot of what it was the morning of Jan 7th, we freeze it effectively, and then that's it. It
Well,
can't
plus
carry-
little capacity for vacant land development in the future. Is that
Right.
kind of the idea?
Yes.
And how do they determine what's going to be on that vacant land? Because I know in phase 2, and I'd like to ask you about this, but in phase 2 with all these single family homes in the Colony and Malibu Road, for the assessment district, you
The
have to
civic
say,
and the civic center will.
Yeah.
and then
phase
phase
2
2
is
is
Colony.
expanding to the residential neighborhoods. They would say your assessment is for a 3-bedroom house. If you think you're going to ever want to expand to a 4-bedroom house, you have to tell us now because we're going to assess you for that. So I'm curious about the vacant land. Maybe they have a way of determining what the maximum.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not a done deal yet, but I thought the assessment council, who was at that last city council meeting, did a good job of explaining it. And maybe because I've been through it once when I was working at the city, I had a clear understanding of what he was saying point by point. But essentially what they do is when they set up the assessment district, an assessment engineer and a design engineer work as a team. So you have a design engineer who's designing the actual collection system, that's going to convey the sewage, in this case, to the City of LA collection system. In our case there, it was to a new wastewater treatment plant. But you have some amount of people you're going to serve and you have some amount of capacity that you can serve. And so matching those two things together through the engineering is done in this process where the design engineer tells you how much capacity they can provide and at what cost, and then the assessment engineer determines, okay, if we divide it up between these people, each person pays so much, or each, these lots pay their respective amounts according to the benefit they receive. And this can go through a couple of iterations to get it to where everyone agrees, because what you're aiming for is a vote.
Everyone, Andrew, who's everyone?
Okay,
Everyone in the
so,
assessment
so
district.
it's 50% plus one. So it's a simple majority of the benefit owners, or who would be the
It's
benefit
on the
owners.
weighted, right? Not everybody has
Establish who are the benefit owners.
This is the assessment engineer who does it. So it's not a regular civil engineer that you think of as designing pipes and pumps and things like that.
He's more of an accountant.
Kind of like a lawyer.
Yeah, he's like an accountant, and so he looks parcel by parcel, and it can be done according to the land area. It can be done according to flow, which is proportional to use. It can be done according to
But what do they look
also
like? They look
organic
like-
load. So if you have restaurants or other commercial uses, they
The
have
famous
higher waste
fixture count
strengths.
worksheet.
or flow rate made by the lamp, right?
But flow of, how do you evaluate a vacant land then?
Exactly. So
Because it's got zoning.
But
So
here's the thing.
has-
But let's
you
talk about
answer.
this. So why do we still have vacant lots on the beach? Is this because they didn't want to build a septic system?
I don't know why they,
And
but I
so-
have no idea
Be a
because
number of reasons.
But imagine
There's
that
more
you're
than one
the
reason.
owner. Imagine that you're the owner of one of these vacant lots. So this could be really good news if, in effect, you can benefit from the sewer, or it could be really bad news because you don't want to build anything. You are the owner of empty land, and suddenly you're being hit by an assessment of 250K. So I have a feeling that Bruce Silverstein, particularly, doesn't want vacant lots to have access to sewers. And if I can read the mind of the planning commissioners, John Mazza also doesn't want it.
But none
So-
of the vacant lots in the burn scar area, which would be served by the sewer, are that large. I mean,
Yeah, these are small parcels.
there's
But
not going to
you're-
be a hotel.
So you're de facto enabling more development that we didn't have before.
I
I'm trying to
don't
even
think
think of how
anybody's
many
worried about
vacant
this.
lots
I think
in the
this
bird
is
zone there are.
We like
10.
them.
There's not a lot.
And by the way, I don't think those vacant landowners would necessarily be a no, even if they don't plan to vote, because the value of their land will be increased.
So, but now to the sewer's point, how many bedrooms do we allocate for them?
This is all going to work itself out as the process proceeds. So, the land use authorities will weigh in, the city council will weigh in, the landowners will weigh in. This will be a democratic process. So,
And there'll be votes.
even though some
several steps
intentions
of the
were
process.
expressed at the last meeting, it's not a done deal yet. So,
So let me,
it's all in.
So let's just pan
in
back out for a
process.
second. Let's just say
Yeah.
that we are designing it to the morning of Jan 7th capacity, right? Let's just call it that. Is that, what's your guys' opinion? Is that the right thing to do? Or while we are going through the process, we're gonna spend 125 million doing this, we might as well lay a slightly bigger pipe in case down the road, let's say a big rock wants to tie in
The Mesa, you mean?
the mesa.
All 240 of those households?
I
Whatever. All
think
that
that,
stuff.
and this is my personal opinion, having lived on Las Flores Mesa with all the landslides we had, which were nothing like the Big Rock landslides, that having septic systems, even with the mitigation program that they have going, is risky. And I-
And
it-
septic system.
Because they're
Yeah.
pumping stuff in
Because
the
it's
ground.
going in the
Well, making it
No, I
wet.
think they're trying to do less, and they also have a system to pump it out and discharge it to the ocean, which is not great. But I think that the best thing to do is that this land is going to be, the landslide is going to be affected by the terrible rains that we get every 100 years, now every 50 years. And we haven't had that for a long time. And I don't want to see, I would like to see the septic effluent affecting the stability.
It goes in the groundwater. So your view would be to use this opportunity and lay a bigger pipe for potentially Big Rock and
And Las
the other.
Flores.
I haven't said that. What I think has to happen is that the only way this is going to happen anywhere in Malibu is if a significant majority of owners want to have.
Can I throw in two thoughts about the mesas? I think it's a little bit different. I'm not a homeowner in the mesas, but here would be my thinking potentially. One, the cost savings are not going to be there. The need to save the rebuilding homeowners six figures and beyond, because they don't have the seawalls. Even if you need to replace your tank entirely, it's $100,000 versus the assessment, which is likely going to be more in those cases. Also,
I'm a one-slide person, and we spent $120,000 10 years ago.
Plus engineer.
so but the other factor is the mesas aren't under threat from. Let's say there are certain people that their boogeyman in Malibu is hotel development. My boogeyman in Malibu is the water board, and those mesa homeowners, no offense,
That's
are
all right.
not under threat from the water board necessarily. So you talk about how this is resident driven, which is right. The residents want a sewer line, or it seems that way. The residents in central Malibu, in the phase 2 area, the Colony and Malibu Road, they didn't have a choice.
It was forced on them.
The water board said, on this date, septics are no longer allowed to be used. They'll become illegal.
So let's
So this assessment district was formed at gunpoint, basically, because it was like, you will approve a sewer or your home will be uninhabitable.
You read that.
Yeah,
So
that's
let's spend a
different.
minute
That's true.
understanding that. I do have a point about the mesas, but I'll hold on to that and we'll come back to it. But let's go back and talk about the Civic Center, the septic prohibition that happened. Why did it happen? How did it self-emerge? Give us a little bit of
So,
a walk down memory lane.
There had been discussions. Malibu Creek and Malibu Lagoon are one of the most significant ecological and public beach areas used by people who take their kids in there and stuff like that. And who would do that?
Yeah, you
know?
see a lot of people like
Yeah.
splashing around.
So
right, in
there
the
was a lot of
lagoon.
concern about the bacteria and the nitrates that were going into the creek and in causing it to not meet water quality standards. And we had constant notices about that. So at that point, when the Malibu lumber yard was being permitted, the city did something. I'm trying to remember. The city permitted it themselves without sending it to the regional board. And it reached a certain threshold of use, and the board got mad. Like the staff got mad, and they started the prohibition. They said it was convinced. They were convinced not only do you have to have these things properly built, but you have to have them properly maintained and properly designed so that they can function in an area where groundwater is 2 or 3 feet below the surface. That's hard to do.
The level of toxicity, then it was said that it was because of the birds and not because of the septic systems. Is this true?
God, no, it is not true.
It
It's
was
all
a
in the
big
birds,
argument.
at least.
It was a big argument back and forth. And
And the
there's a
last-
whole administrative record on it.
bird poop?
Yeah, no. There was even a dead body found on a
Well,
right,
this
yeah,
is
20 years
this is
ago.
ongoing.
And that guy didn't die
But
because
let me
of
explain.
nitrous poisoning.
As Madelyn says,
It was
this had
interesting.
been an issue that had been talked about for years and
Decades.
years and decades. So it wasn't as if it had just come up or it was just because of one thing. It had been talked about and talked about and talked about. And as the on-site wastewater treatment technology got better and better and better, the city's position was, yes, you can do this. You can have these commercial facilities on-site systems and they can be safe. The water board scientists didn't agree with us at the city at the time. And basically they won. They got the prohibition through. You know, I would maintain that it can be done, which is more efficient, which is more cost effective. You know, that's will
Yeah,
sort
but
of
you
solve
know,
it.
for areas where you have houses right next to the creek and you have houses right next to the ocean, it's not very cautious to have those on septic systems.
So,
So the CH people in other jurisdictions,
Yeah.
they thought it was crazy that there was septic systems, OWTS, within any stretch of 1 mile from the coast. They thought it was unsavory at best and reckless.
But that's why we have advanced water treatment systems, by the way, which is a different, and that's why also restaurants have increased interceptors too. So there's a little bit of
You know,
like I said, I've lived here a long time. Most people think their septic systems work if it doesn't come gurgling up in their sinks or their toilets. I don't think people understand. I think they've used septic systems as a no-cost measure. Like, it's been there. I'm not having any problems with it.
Except the
No,
reality.
no problem. The
Wherever it
reality
goes,
is
goes.
going down the other way.
And we surfers drink it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But we're
it's
so strong
it's
right now.
really one of the big issues for me is that people really don't know how to maintain these things. And they don't. Now the city requires them to have somebody at least come in and inspect it. But no one knows what's going on down there. You know what they do to decide whether any bacteria is getting through? They don't do any testing.
Yeah.
They check to see if the light on the ozone,
It can be ultraviolet light.
well, the
or-
EV light goes on. If it's on, they must be killing the bacteria. I'm thinking,
Well, and how many seepage pits do we have that have been drilled and bored that did not go through any kind of percolation testing?
I mean, everything built prior to the 70s, you could assume they just dug a hole and said,
You know
that's
what?
what
They looked at the color of the soil.
It's a complex subject, and
Yeah.
we don't have time to
Yeah.
deal with
I
every
just wanna-
piece of it.
I
But
wanna speak
I think both sides are valid. Like Madelyn's making statements that really are correct in terms of the science and technology of on-site wastewater treatment, and at the same time, there's reasons why it's set up that way. Can you fine a homeowner, $10,000 a day if
So this
his
happened
bacteria
when-
level
what-
went over?
what-
There's not enough.
what
There's not
year
enough
was this?
staff in any agency to keep up with every single homeowner that way.
What year was the septic prohibition in the civic center area?
it happened just after I joined the commission in 2009.
So,
was the first vote.
fairly recently, and the homeowners were given how long?
Years. It was actually set up that the city did the plant design and the pipe design, and then they were supposed to do the assessment district design, and they did that for the first phase, which is all commercial. And they never did it for any of the areas
Well,
adjacent to that.
let
Yeah.
me jump in here. So they, like you said, they did phase one, which is the commercial areas and the city hall area. Phase two was supposed to have been completed already, but there are delays, and the water board accepts those delays. I think some cultural artifacts were found in
Yeah.
these areas. So now supposedly by 2029 is when the sewer has to be in along Malibu Road.
That's,
so
20 years after.
that's phase two. But here's the point I want to make on behalf of beach owners. Phase two was only going to be necessary if the testing in the water by the water board was unacceptable after phase one was complete. It was unacceptable. So now phase two is going in. That's going to be in hopefully by 2029.
Well,
This is phase
Danny,
three.
I'm going to interrupt you. It was actually the reverse. So there were some misstatements made in the past, but I was there at the time when the city manager negotiated this with the executive officer of the regional board, and it was voted on by the board, of which Madelyn was on at the time. It was if the water does not clean up as a result of phase one, if it doesn't clean up, then you don't have to do phase two because it's proof that it's naturally occurring.
Oh, and he's
And if we go back and
Who
read,
said that?
well,
All right, we all have different views of history.
that's
I
what it
appreciate
said.
that.
I mean, I have all the documents
Well,
on my
let's-
computer somewhere.
Whether that's true or not, I believe you, but I'm not going to give the water board the benefit of the doubt. I think after phase two goes in, phase three will go in.
I
And
think
maybe it's for- maybe it's
everyone
for-
is so tired of this that no one will want to make it go in.
Maybe it's exactly for the reason you're saying, Andrew, that they're saying the testing will improve after phase two, which means we need to do phase three. That's not how I
Yeah.
ever read it, but that sounds fine.
And
Yeah,
phase three
I'm only
is
talking
what?
about how it's written. Whether it should or shouldn't happen is a whole other question.
So
The
this is-
plant was built to accommodate all
All
of
to
it.
bring
so.
it back to Eastern Malibu and the rebuild sewer line. After phase three is complete, I don't think they will be satisfied with these assessment districts at gunpoint. So if the residents don't vote 51% for this sewer line when there's potential for subsidized funding, I think that the water board is going to force it upon people in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, Madeline? Do you think that's a possibility?
I really, I'll tell you, after this experience, it was so horrendous for the water board having to, this is full out war and very, very difficult. It was horrible for me. You know, I couldn't even go to the grocery store. You know, I think that there isn't a lot of appetite to force phase 3.
But for a second, I mean, within the soul of the water board, what do they think? What's
They care about that the water is clean enough for people to safely swim in and have their children swim in it, that it doesn't kill all the fish and other things in the lagoon or in the ocean.
And it's their job, you know, when
That's
they
our job.
sign up for their job.
So that's a noble mission.
The job.
And
description.
can that be achieved with the septic systems as they are?
I don't think so.
But I think that there's a big difference though with the city center and the sewer here. The beach homes are on the ocean. The ocean, there's constant currents of water. So the toxicity when measured in the ocean is always going to be better than a stagnant lagoon that for most part of the year, the lagoon doesn't really breach. And it's very famous in the surfing community. We wanted to breach closer to the colony instead of closer to the Adamson house because it shapes the bottoms and it connects the second
Gives you a
section with the
better
third
ride.
one. So it's some local surfers are famous for breaching it manually after the first heavy rain, and that's when all this water that has been there, I mean, water percolates on the Arden ground, but it's stagnant right there. That's where you get a lot of toxicity, and this is the argument that the regional board used to enforce this around the lagoon. It's just future tripping a little bit. Maybe they change the rules and they impose it. But I think that was their argument. The water was stuck right there.
Yeah,
Well,
so
what
I think
about-
you have a great point.
What about Madelyn's earlier point that OWTS was never meant to handle the big loads that it is being used to handle at
There's no place
at
else.
Nobu? Those facilities, right, those developments, they just brought in tons of OWTS to handle how many patient or hotel rooms?
You're 65. Yeah, how did it? Is there one big tank or multiple?
It's a very advanced system.
Exactly, and also
It's
the
a very
percolation
advanced
rates
treatment system.
on the beach. You have pockets of sand. That thing percolates like crazy. So it's not about the tank.
Where does
It's
it
about the
percolate
percolation.
to, though?
Where
It's groundwater.
I know this for
The
a fact
groundwater.
because I worked with Norm Heining
guess
for
that-
8 years on the
Oh,
hotel.
okay.
So he said, dude, I can put here 40 rooms, no problem. The septic system that I have can percolate 100 if I want.
But that's north side of PCH. We're talking south
No, but
side.
this is a sand pocket that connects to the ocean.
Well, you see, this is going to be controversial.
Can I highlight something you just said? He believes an AOWTS tank can support a 100-room hotel.
We have 40 rooms and it's hard solids.
So septic tanks aren't any sort of restriction
No,
on
but it's
hotel development.
It's an additional gate. It's a game. Development has gates, and in the whole world, development is a good thing. In Malibu, this is a paradise. We don't like development. The more gates to development there are, the better. If you're removing one gate, there's fear.
Andrew, I want to ask you about the seawalls. There is this notion that, you know, obviously there's going to be savings with the sewer line going in. You don't have to spend money building the seawall to protect the septic that was there. But you offered a different perspective on the seawalls serving two purposes. Share more.
Okay, so I was taught by the old timers that Madeline referred to earlier, the early builders, who first fought the sewer with Madeline back in the 80s. And part of the reason the sewer was disliked by the majority of the city was Eastern Malibu property owners knew that their seawall was protecting the land under their home from the encroachment of the mean high tide line. And so what I'm talking about is if you take the seawall away from the home, the mean high tide line is eventually going to move towards the highway through coastal erosion. Coastal erosion is a big, big issue in the city, and this was actually something that Darren spoke to. There was a whole study done on coastal vulnerability and coastal erosion because the last city council group wanted that to happen. It was almost as if it was forgotten about at this time, but a big discussion is still needed, in my opinion, in the city about what happens with coastal erosion if you don't have a seawall, because eventually the highway riprap becomes your seawall. Or if you don't have riprap, Caltrans has to build a wall there. Okay, but on the flip side,
And what's the downside to that?
okay, the downside of that is there's a thing called the public trust doctrine. And it's not just in California. This is old time law. It actually comes, I think, from common law. But it has to do with the location of the mean high tide line relative to where your building is on your land.
This is state lands, right?
It's not state. Well, the state lands is involved, but every coastal state has their own state agency to deal with it. And if you read the news articles about what's happening on the East Coast and on the southern coasts, they're dealing with this with coastal homes everywhere.
They moved them backwards.
Yeah, because if you lose your land, then you don't have a right to your home anymore.
Or in Hawaii too.
Yeah, so if you lose a little bit, you can lease that land back from the state. Okay, you
Which
can lease
people
it
do
back.
here already.
Which people already do, but if you lose all of it, it becomes a different situation. And so I've read, legal scholars' articles on this. If you search around online, you'll eventually find the same ones.
So good
And-
news for the fire victims though, because you're entitled to rebuild what you had before, the same footprint.
But even if you're
Say-
Yeah,
listen, this
but
is
in the
separate
future,
argument.
okay, but you can now, so you can build your home back now. But in the future, you're owning a home on someone else's property, and that becomes a legal issue
On the
that
state
is
property.
that is still unresolved. The
I
only
think
reason you
I
can
think
have a
you've all got
seawall.
the sea oceanography wrong. Which is that the seawall makes the waves bang up against the seawall and it erodes the beach.
No,
So
I
that's
agree with
the
that.
argu- that's
It
the argument
exacerbates
that-
erosion.
That's one of the things that.
Yeah, but you're either gonna have a seawall at the house or you're gonna have it at the highway. Look at the old photos of Malibu. It was a coastal bluff that came down to the ocean, and the ocean intersected it on a cliff. There was no beach.
You're totally right, but when you design a new seawall, they don't let you put the seawall wherever you want. You have to put it as lower as you feasibly.
So putting in these seawalls, I don't believe is any sort of way to protect your property. Even if this is true, you're protecting a couple feet right by the highway. You're not protecting the rest of it.
Well, to Andrew's point, like I studied it for our property, the AOWTS we would have to put in would cause the seawall to be 55 feet south to PCH because the AOWS has to be so big and you have to have clear space around it. So the seawall needs to be around that leach field. Thus, 2/3 of the property would have been protected by a seawall. It is very extensive, but it is legally possible. And that's all he's saying.
Last thing I want to say about this dicey legal argument is that if you're saying a seawall protects the mean high tide line, and this is all now my property because it's protected by the seawall, the state can't charge me rent on it or whatever. The state could say, theoretically, your seawall should not be there. It's on public land now. We're charging you rent for that seawall you built in 2027.
Yes.
It's actually they're giving you the right to keep your seawall.
And charging you for it.
And under the current administration, yes, you can rebuild your house and you can rebuild your seawall. But under future administrations, who knows how many years down the road, you may not be able to rebuild a seawall. You may not be able to rebuild a septic system. And this is sort of an opportunity in time that isn't going to be there forever.
I see that one, but don't you agree that there's a clock, a natural clock to properties on the beach? In 100 years, if we think 100 years ahead, how many homes are going to be on the beach?
I mean, PCH might not even be there.
That's what they say.
Yeah, one of the coastal engineers used to put in every report, owning a beach house is like owning a battleship. You have to, keep strengthening it and protecting it and maintaining it.
But you can keep it forever, though.
If you build it properly,
Especially if it'll go out to sea.
Yeah, speaking of beach houses, this is a fascinating conversation. I love the different perspective. Let's talk about one counterpoint that was brought up right at the council meeting by a resident, and the basic argument is that look, this is not cheap. 125 million, 300,000 per assessment, and their cost could go up after the initial 10 million is spent to just evaluate what the actual cost is going to be. And in the meantime, there are several folks that are getting permits, i.e., they are spending money in rebuilding their damaged septic tanks for those who aren't as lucky as to have an intact septic system, which Thankfully, the water board has approved the use of. But what do we say to those residents? Like, you're just spending, let's just call it for the wet beaches, I think the range was 700 to like a 1.5 million for your seawall and septic. For the dry beaches, a little bit less than that. But what do we tell those residents who are just spending this money, they rebuild, they're eager to get back in a home? It is in all of our interests that they rebuild sooner, before 2030, which is when is the expected end date.
End date of,
The sewer line, if it goes through. And then in 2030, they're gonna be like, forget the $1 million that you just spent, and here's a new assessment. What's our response there, guys?
Well, they can vote no. So they still have, rights to do that. If there are enough people that vote no, then they don't. But if you're spending $1.5 million, the assessments, what did they say, 250, 300?
Yeah,
That would be on top of it. It's not ideal. They did talk about some temporary solutions, right, which we didn't really get into.
no,
The details are.
Passed at the council.
I think that it's going to be something that has to be worked out with the regional board.
Yeah, and I think you'll still have to have some kind of seawall to protect your temporary solution. It may not be the same seawall that you
Could be
would
a
have
weaker
built, but
seawall.
you're
Less
you're
expensive.
going to need something. Go walk on the beaches and you'll see what I'm talking about.
What if we use from the mandatory 2 parking spots unless you had an existing non-conforming condition where you only had 1 parking or 0? There's some portable tanks that could be placed. I know this is like
Yeah, it's
kind of at the box, so then it just gets pumped out, so you don't need to put a seawall.
But that's, as much as that is a good discussion in theory, in practicality, for somebody that's already rebuilding, your septics and your seawalls, isn't it one of the first things that you need to think of where it's gonna go and start building, because the house is gonna go up above
You can
that,
design
right?
your house more or less around it, and there's some separation that you need to keep also. You
So
have a reach to.
how does it help the rebuilder?
Well, for Eastern Malibu, that method he was talking about, where you take up a parking place with that, was it MVV, the container?
Yeah, the MBB.
AR.
No, my point is
VVR,
how that-
that is above the BFE, meaning you don't need.
No, that may very well be above the BFE. That's not my point. My point is that, let's just say there is no certainty about the sewers going in yet or not, right? There's no certainty yet. So, but yet you just start building houses. Now you can't have a temporary solution taking up a space of your parking and then retrofit a
real one later.
A real one later. That's not really an option.
It's a big gamble.
Can I speak practically about this? I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but the number of houses in the eastern beaches that are not going to be rebuilt quickly it's a very large number.
It is
The
staggering.
seawall costs are just too high for that area, for these small parcels, for what those houses used to sell for what they'll sell in the future. The math doesn't pencil out. So I don't see that there's going to be a huge number of these residents who are jumping the gun, who are going to have to pay for both the seawall and the assessment. I think
But they're
it's-
going in and getting permits now.
Well, only a handful, because the majority that I speak to,
sandier beaches.
they're struggling to figure out how they'll pay to rebuild it all, and thus they're waiting for the maybe a sewer, which is the less expensive
Well,
option for.
I think it's important for a group like yours, the things that you're talking about today. Certainly, the city is thinking about how they might present an option to the regional board for something temporary. And I think that they need to hear from you the reality of what it would mean to put something in temporary. So I think it would be good.
Well, listen, this is going to continue to be a riveting conversation, a much needed one, a much more important one. So I certainly appreciate both of you joining us today.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to continue to have more conversations as this story unfolds, to get different perspectives and to get the community voices heard. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for all the expert insights that you just shared.
Thank you. Just a neighbor
Thanks very much.
for me.
Thank you, me too.
Thanks, Gus.
Thank you.